I'm going to be impolitic here.
Do it.
Claudine Gay is not an anti-Semite.
Maybe they were influenced by some people. I don't know. Maybe they were influenced by some people.
It's possible. I just want to make it clear to everyone out there, I am not doing the jokes.
No, that's us. Welcome back to
Ami's house.
Today we are joined by Rabbi David Wolpe. Thank you so much for joining us here at Ami's house.
It's great to be in your house.
I have to say, first off, I'll fanboy for just a minute. I first discovered you many years ago on those early debates with Sam Harris, like 2006.
Yeah,
the famous Elvis clip that went around. But I watched the whole debate, and I just want to give kudos to you because there haven't been enough voices, I think, out there lending a lot of just willing to engage in that kind of public forum. And I felt like you were one of those people out there willing to engage in the public world, in the Umada public world, and lent a lot of credibility to Jewish ideas, and a lot of intellectual weight. And I really always appreciate
that.
So,
I enjoyed doing them, and I think I learned a lot doing them. So it was good for me, too.
For sure. And we learn a lot from our critics as well as our people who praise us. So I always appreciated seeing that, and it gave me a lot of chizuk, strength. I'm like, okay, Jewish ideas can stand on their own, And I think even Hitchens said like he enjoyed debating the rabbis the most. So for what that's worth, I think he was probably talking about you. Anyway, so there's a lot of stuff to cover, and I've heard you've been making rounds and doing several podcasts, actually Sam Harris recently as well. So I want to talk a little bit from a different angle about kind of within our community, within the Jewish community, what's been going on, the current state of anti-Semitism as it is right now, because personally, I can sort of feel the proverbial eye roll of the world that looks at the Jewish community just when we say the word anti-Semitism. There's this. It's not very obviously in recent events not met with empathy, but met with what this again? What
again.
Now again? And we're saying yes, but they're saying really. So what I struggle with is this idea of how do you maintain awareness of something without it becoming a fatigued idea, without people becoming desensitized to it? Does it have diminishing returns? Have there been failures in the anti-Semitism movement or never forget movement, for lack of a better expression? What are the pitfalls of that, and how can we keep people aware of something so that when it does show its ugly face, people don't just have apathy as there seem to be showing now?
So, I mean, I think it's a fantastic question. And it's a question that's in the ballpark, as you say, like when you said, again, I heard my mother saying "nochamol," which means, again, basically, which she used to say to us every time we would do something that would annoy her. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of it is that we really are too quick to scream anti-Semitism when people, I will give you a perfect example. Claudine Gay is not an anti-Semite. She's just not. I know her. She was serious about dealing with, she didn't know very much about the Jewish history, but she put all serious Zionists on that committee. She wanted to do something. I mean, whatever her failings, to call her an anti-Semite is just absurd. And it's too easy, and it's knee-jerk, and it makes real anti-Semites exempt. People who really do stuff. Louis Farrakhan is a real anti-Semite. And I think we ought to reserve the words for people who really hate Jews. Most of the students at Harvard, they barely know what they're saying. They want social acceptance. It's not that Harvard student body is anti-Semitic, for example. Are there anti-Semites among them? Yeah, no doubt about it. But I think that that's the first job of the Jewish community is, to use the word carefully. And this is a problem that I think is endemic to minorities in general. Too many people get called racist. Too many people get called homophobic. Too many people get called transphobic. Too many people get called anti-Semitic. And especially in our case, there are enough genuine homicidal anti-Semites out there that we really need to restrict it to the people that deserve the title. We won't have any paucity of candidates.
So Farrakhan is not being considered for president of Harvard right now. Is that what we're saying? Thank God. I totally agree with you, and I've also said that. When you call Whoopi Goldberg, Joe Rogan, and Richard Spencer the same word, the word is deemed meaningless. And
perfectly put.
I found myself. I was in a conversation recently with Candace Owens, and I found that one of the reasons she was not sensitive to anti-Semitism is that there were years leading up to it where she associated it as this left-wing cancel culture tactic, as opposed to, hey, just because cancel culture is a problem and we're using racism and words like that too loosely doesn't mean that when you do see it, you commit tribally to this concept of, I don't call out racism ever. You just push everybody away from you.
Right.
Yeah. Do you think we're too far gone at this point? What do we do at this point to correct it from where
this is such a such a fraught moment for so many reasons that it's hard to know what the world will look like in a year or 5 years. At this moment, I think barring something really like egregiously anti-Semitic, the accusation of anti-Semitism has very little cultural power. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that it will stay that way. It's just we're at an incredibly fraught and difficult time for all the reasons that we all know. So.
And where do you draw the distinction then? Because you have addressed many times this ascendance of anti-Semitism on the far left that is legitimate and is kind of existing and being just like festered on college campus. So where do you draw the distinction between, like you said, President Claudine Gay, who is not, maybe needs to be informed on the Jewish history and experience and why we're sensitive to this, but don't throw around that term loosely at certain administrators, but where do you draw the distinction between where you do see it on campus?
So here, I want to make a distinction that I'm sure other people have made. I haven't heard it, but I made it the other day and I thought, oh my gosh, this actually might make sense. Mm-hmm. So there are two different kinds of anti-Semites. I mean, there are probably lots, but at least for purposes of our discussion. One is people who are like physically revolted and hate Jews, like in their guts. Mm-hmm. And when they see someone, they don't know how to feel about them. And as soon as they hear that they're Jewish, they hate them. Because one of the weird things about anti-Semitism is you don't always know whether you're supposed to hate someone or not. You have to wait and find out sometimes. And then when you know they're Jewish, then you know you're supposed to hate them. But there is another kind of anti-Semitism, which I actually think is more the anti-Semitism of the left. It's not a visceral hatred of seeing someone who's Jewish. It is hating the Jew, which is different. And it's more ideological. And it's less like visceral. So someone who hates the Jew can have, and I know this sounds like a ridiculous, but they can have close Jewish friends. And so they don't see themselves as anti-Semitic. What they hate is their idea of what the Jew is and represents. Now, you can do both. I mean, I think the Nazis did both. They hated the Jew and Jews. But what we're dealing with today on the left, I think, is much more. I mean, there are people who viscerally hate Jews, I have no doubt, but there's much more the ideological hatred of what they think of as the Jew. And that's an important, I think, ideological battle to fight. And it's one of the reasons why, like, for me, if I had a choice, and someone said I'm anti-Semitic, and I know like the normal thing is, oh, you have to take them to Auschwitz. I would take them to Tel Aviv because that's where you break the stereotype of the Jew. And that's what I think we need to do.
And can you define that for us, what in their minds you believe is the Jew versus a Jewish person? Like
the Jew is this conspiratorial.
Maybe you're looking at it right now. I don't know.
The conspiratorial, ideological enemy of what they hold to be sacred, and so it can be different. If they're communists, then the Jew is the capitalist. Mm-hmm. If they're capitalists, the Jew is the communist. But the point is that they believe that this represents the essence of the Jew. And so when Jews aren't that, they're perfectly willing to say, okay, these Jews, like they're normal, quote unquote, people. And so that's why I think, like, seeing Jews of very different kinds, like Mizrahi Jews, Ethiopian Jews, Jews of like who build things, Jews who, I mean, all those kinds of things, I think are helpful in breaking this ridiculous but very deeply held stereotype.
I would imagine you'd be hard pressed to find someone on the left who would admit to hating the Jew. I mean, do you think that's even something someone's aware of when you say it like that?
No, but I think it's something that someone can be brought out of anyway. That is, your horizons can be expanded even if you didn't realize beforehand that they were narrow. So I think that a lot of people, when they go to Israel, are shocked at what the country is actually like. And it does change their view of it. But there's no, I mean, there just is nothing like experience. So
yeah, it seems to all be conveniently wrapped up in the anti-Zionist narrative that, hey, it's not Jews we have a problem with. It's the Jewish state, or this claim that the Jewish state is illegitimate. And it seems to be, as long as they can hide behind that, they're protected from the charge of racism that they claim to be so ideologically against. But I think I'm always very weary of accusing somebody of believing something that they don't consciously even know about, right? I feel like on the far left, you saw that a lot with people saying, this society is completely racist. Yet, like, back to what we were saying earlier about using a term like racism so loosely, you're calling people racist who will say, I have black friends, I have Asian friends, I have Jewish friends. I am not racist. I know in my heart what I am. So it's I feel like you're walking a fine line when you're trying to tell somebody what's in their heart or what's in their mind. You know, so
I agree with you. And it only and therefore you have to pay attention to what they express. If someone says, I'm not racist, but I hate every black country, then you got to say, you know, maybe there is a gap in your self-awareness. If someone says, I'm not racist, but the one place that I hate, the one country I can't stand is the only Jewish country in the world, right? Every other country, even Russia does terrible things. I don't hate Russia, right? Germany, 2 world wars. I don't hate Germany, but Israel I hate. Then I think that you're lacking a certain self-awareness.
Right. This kind of ties into another question I had, which was, it always seems to me just instinctually to be a low resolution argument to say, everyone just hates the Jews. I mean, we say it at at our Shabbos tables all the time. And there's this generational divide. You know, you have your Holocaust surviving generation that believes it. Then you have the boomers who are sort of split of like, it could happen here. And I will say, I think since October 7th, I'm a grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors. And even I was like, listen, that was then. I can't even fathom how it could happen now. Post October 7th, watching the apologists of atrocity against Jews and seeing how to intellectualize it, I was like, oh, I see now in a civilized modern society how it can happen. So there was an awakening for all of us. But it always seems low resolution to me to just say they all hate the Jews. And at the same time, when you're watching the trials going on in South Africa after an attack on Israel, after an attack on Jews, and the sympathy that was gained for Hamas, it's not even, we want peace and 2-state. You're seeing Hamas support out there unapologetically. You can't help but logically come to that conclusion, not emotionally, but logically. So I don't know, you know?
Well, I mean, I just today actually on Twitter, I posted the Houthi flag. I don't know if you've ever seen the Houthi flag, but the Houthi flag reads as follows. This is their flag. God is the greatest. Death to America, death to Israel, a curse upon the Jews, victory to Islam.
So we agree on one of those things.
Yeah. So I think they're not anti-Zionists there.
Yeah.
A curse upon the Jews. And the reason that I posted it wasn't because everyone's a Houthi, but because there you see made explicit what is often implicit, which is that the virulence and the hatred and the hostility towards Israel has sort of a rocket fuel that can only come from the hatred of the kind of people that make up that country. So,
have you been following the trial?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What do you think?
So, I mean,
kind of a broad question. But
okay, so this is what
is it worth engaging with something like that? It's a lose-lose.
First of all, by the way, I mean, I've had Tal Becker at the synagogue. He's terrific. He is just I mean, one of the things I want to do is just give a shout out to Tal Becker. I think he's a wonderful representative of our people, and I was glad to hear him And also, I thought that he did extraordinarily well in difficult circumstances. So did the others, but I thought that he, since he gave the first and broadest pitch, that was important. What I think is that, okay, this is not going to be, I'm going to be impolitic here.
Do it.
What I think is that some really idiotic things that some thoughtless Israelis said did tremendous damage to our country. And I just, it's like, don't you hear yourselves? Now, I know and you know that the policy of the IDF has nothing to do with the statements of Ben Gvir. But I also know that if you're a minister in a government, you're supposed to talk like a minister in a government, not like a thug on the street. And unfortunately, that's not how many of them talked. And they gave the South Africans tremendous rhetorical ammunition.
Maybe they were influenced by some people. I don't know. Maybe they were influenced by some people.
It's possible.
Some
it's
people.
Possible.
Great
it could have happened. Could be.
Yeah.
So I really, I deeply regret that. And not that that's decisive, but I regret it. Look, I mean, there are so many ironies in this that the country that came to Israel's defense here is Germany. I don't know if you saw that Germany came and said, as I think it's like an amicus curiae brief. It's like a friend of the court brief. They almost said, I don't want to be flippant about this. They almost said, look, we know genocide, and this is not genocide,
I bought a Mercedes. I'm back in.
It's like you're transgressing on our historical experience here, and we know the difference.
We're offended. We are so offended that you would choose. Have you seen what we can do?
If you want to do it, here's how you would do it.
Yeah. I'm so glad you guys are doing the jokes, because I just want to make it clear to everyone out there, I am not doing the jokes.
No, that's
those
us.
jokes
Come
come
from
from
us. Rabbi Wolpe is safe, so safe. For Juden is safe. No, but I would say. But isn't it curious that they're looking for any type of transgression, linguistic transgression on the Israeli side, and the explicit calls for death to Jews on the other side is ignored, and that is so curious to me. I mean, it's not.
Well, I mean, this is a part of it. There's so many. It's questions about why something happens is always overdetermined. I can give you 20 reasons why. Obviously, is there anti-Semitism behind it? Yes. Is there ideology behind it? Yes. Is there an attempt to whitewash, I guess that's not the right term in this case, but to whitewash one's own record in South Africa? Yes. Is there an attempt to curry favor with the Arab world, which after all is a wealthy world? And, Hamas had a delegation there at the hearing. I mean, there are just so many reasons that make it a farce, but it's very damaging and very painful.
Why not let that dog and pony show just play out? Like, there's a debate that I have sometimes when I'm I sometimes make videos talking about Israel, and then I wonder, who I'm trying to reach here, because there's an area of the engagement threshold. Israel is going to get, to the extent that Israel tries to explain and showcase how it's virtuous, it's hated that much more. So it digs its own grave in a sense by trying to appease the people who hate you for your very existence. Trying to appease them will only upset them.
I think that's true, but I also think that Israel thought this is actually our only chance to tell the world that we actually gave people 3 weeks to get out, not a day. And it's our only chance to say, don't forget that Al-Shifa Hospital was blown up by a Hamas rocket. It was not blown up by an Israeli rocket. And so it's very hard when you have important facts that nobody else is advancing. It's very hard to say we're not going to advance these facts. So I understand why they did it. I hope that it did some good. I don't know. I don't know.
Essentially, I mean, it's almost like a treadmill running in place, right? If you let the lies pedal without you showing up to fight them, they will spread, even to good-natured people. Well, I heard this, I heard that, and it's sort of like you're fighting this toxic information that's going to keep going out. And even if you feel like you're just swimming in place, you have to keep swimming or you'll drown. There's sort of something that was kind of poetic.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, in this war, weirdly, our narrative takes more explanation. It's no longer intuitive. So anyway,
didn't take very long for that to happen,
No, it did not take very long for that to happen. It took 10 minutes.
Yeah, I guess there's something to be said about still showing up and making the case, even to reinforce those already on your side that you're doing your best effort. But it's almost like you're asking permission. Asking permission for self-defense feels very perverse to me. That's all. You know, the rapist comes into your home and you say, "Hey guys, is it cool if I take care of this? Like, trust me, how I handled this murderer was justified." And the minute you do that, you're sort of ceding a certain moral high ground in a way to bad actors. So I'm torn about it, but yeah, it leaves us a little sad. Mm-hmm. I want to ask about moving on slightly to a more general topic about, you've engaged with a lot of the secular humanists and prominent intellectuals over the years. And I find that as I look around in the culture now, I feel like we're in a phase of I don't know how to call it, post-atheism, post-secular humanism, where we're left a little bit with the kind of results. I don't want to attribute everything that's bad in the world to sort of the four horsemen who were out there talking about this. Right. But I do remember years ago on a podcast, I think it was Dave Rubin, but you said something about, of course you can have good secularists, good secular humanists, a good atheist person can be a moral person, but if you strip a society from the soil, from the Judeo-Christian soil by which its foundation developed, its moral foundation, its moral objectivity developed, if you strip it from the soil, eventually you will start to see rot and it will decay. And I find that, I wonder if in the younger generations in particular, we're seeing this inability to see right from wrong when it's right in front of you. And is there a correlation there, or some kind of link between people looking for meaning and turning to nihilism, or not having, or that sort of the edginess and sort of appeal of secular humanism and atheistic, we don't need organized religion? Are we seeing results of that in particularly younger people?
There are a lot of things, there are a lot of ways to go about this question, but I think it is a combination of that and the profoundly disorienting nature of technological progress, by which I mean social media, AI, whatever climate change is, in other words, the human imprint has grown so great and so disorienting that I think it's harder for people to find in themselves the sort of divine rootedness that traditional religions offer. So much so, by the way, that I think even traditional religions find themselves less rooted than they once were. And so it's a profoundly confusing time. It's almost like we're in this dizzying spin where I think that all the things that we're talking about today, in a year, AI, for example, is going to profoundly influence, and no one knows how. And when you think about the world that way, you understand why also young people, I made this comment, and then a young person said something to me that really made me understand much better what I had said. I talked about the fact that most of the students that I've met at Harvard, really what they want to do is just go work at Goldman Sachs. It's not, they're not really ideological. They want to get a good job afterwards. And then one of them said to me, and that was because, in part, that was influenced by, I was sitting next to a poet at this luncheon at the Literary Society, and I said, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" And she said, "I'm going to get a job at Goldman Sachs." And I thought, why is that? And then one of the students said to me, "It's because when you went to college, you never doubted whether you'd ever be able to buy a house. But we don't think we're going to be able to unless we get a job at Goldman Sachs." And so there's economic insecurity, there's technological insecurity, there's a thinning out of religious rootedness. There's a lot of stuff going on that makes it honestly harder to be young now, I think, than when I was. And by the way, lest we forget, the students right now on Harvard's campus who are going nuts, remember that the last couple of years of their high school, they were locked up because of the pandemic. So we're not in a healthy society at the moment.
Yeah, I also just... that's interesting. I didn't think about that. We're coming off the heels of the post-traumatic effects of those bond. We forget a year or two for an adult is whatever. And that's
for me, the pandemic. I have to say, I don't mean to give it, but I had a good pandemic.
Pulpit rabbi, of course. What a dream.
I was home. I would talk to people on Zoom. I would study with my books. I was fine.
And you could always kick somebody out because of bad internet. It's a great move. It's a great move.
That's right. But boy, if you're a senior in high school or a freshman in college, it's terrible.
And people do want to come around some sort of cause, like they want meaning. They're looking for fulfillment.
Yes.
And if you throw the baby out with the bathwater, especially when it comes to organized religion, I do feel like there's a sense of community. They're looking for community that motivates.
Exactly. I think in some ways that's the greatest loss. The greatest loss is that what religion provides is other people that you can count on and that care about you, and that's huge.
Well, I mean, I suppose that happened to me during BLM. I was locked up, and then I got to go out for the BLM marches, and I showed up, and I don't regret it, but I could see rallying around another cause just the same.
Just in the sense of feeling part of something.
Motivate
that need to feel part of a community.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, what do you see going forward? I felt like looking at the universities and the climate, Columbia, Harvard, MIT, do you see it as for Jewish students in the United States looking to these Ivy Leagues, was there a nail in the coffin as far as are these going to be safe campuses for Jews? Or is YU admissions just through the roof and that's just going to be what it is? Or, how do people, what's to come to repair that feeling of lack of safety?
I mean, I think that it's, Mark Cherendorf, who's head of Maimonides Fund, wrote an article in which he said, and I think that this is a good step. He said we should get a minion of good colleges for Jews and start supporting them with our students and with our resources and with our so on. And we should do the research and say, this college is good and you should go here. And I think that's part of it. But the Ivies are not done. I mean, they still have deep resources. They do important research, especially, by the way, the hard sciences. I mean, this is mostly a phenomenon of the humanities and social sciences, mostly. And also, by the way, even though obviously Harvard has been a really tricky place to be at, it has a fantastic Jewish community there. Great professors, a lot of people who spoke up. The Hillel was overflowing, the Chabad was overflowing. It's like there's a lot of life left in these places. So I hope it will get better.
Yeah, I am seeing this sort of public backlash. You see it in the press about against the DEI campaigns and how that's affecting the academy and how it's affecting. I don't know. Do you see a tide shifting, and given these trials and what went on and what we saw testifying before Congress, are people like, whoa? If we can't just answer simple questions, if there's something so ridiculous, only an intellectual will say them, right? We need to reevaluate just basic moral truths about what we're trying to do here, creating people who can think and not what to think, but how to think. Is there? I do think
that in that sense, this has been a clarifying moment. Mm-hmm. It's it wasn't just the answer, although everybody focused on that one answer. It was that you have to have, as you said, leadership that has real moral clarity and is not afraid to express it. And when you're training people that everything depends on who you are and nothing depends on objective conditions outside of you, you have a recipe for a really distorted view of the world and a sick society. Mm-hmm. So the fact that all this happened maybe will lead to a healthier one. We can hope so.
Yeah.
I had a question for you, less specifically as an expert in anti-Semitism, more as a rabbi who gives counsel to people. I've had this feeling post October 7th that Ami and I had discussed, and we've discussed it on the show before. And I was hoping maybe you could help me articulate a little bit or put words into it. I think it's very specific to post October 7th. It comes up a lot on social media, especially when I see someone I used to admire and I used to rely on for my news, and I used to rely on to kind of give me perspective on what's going on in the world. And I see them, put something out that just crushes me. And and I want to just shake them and be I'm not even prepared to have that debate. I would be awful at it.
Right.
But it's this helpless feeling. It's this rage. And I don't know what to call it. I don't know how to talk about it. Have people been speaking to you about this, or have you?
Yes.
Can we have your number? We just need your cell. That's all Michael said. But yeah.
You know, it's funny. My father, many years ago, published an editorial in the New York Times, and it was about this. It was about all the heroes of the left that he had once admired, and they all, proved to be not what he hoped when it came to the Jews. And what I would say, look, the disappointment, first of all, like celebrities and sports figures should not be taken seriously about their public pronouncements on other things, except in the very rare case, and there are rare cases where they really have educated themselves and know something, but the vast majority don't. And I had a public dialogue with Steven Jackson, who was a basketball player, and had said some anti-Semitic things. And so we did a dialogue on Instagram. And the truth is, he had never really thought about the kinds of things I was saying. He just didn't. And there was no reason for him to. And why should he? We hear a lot of people in our community say things about the Black experience that is not informed by any kind of serious thought or engagement. And so the first thing I think when I see a celebrity that I admire say something that I don't admire is, okay, they're fine actors. They're just idiots when it comes to this. And I should not assume that skills are transferable one to the other. Mm-hmm. It's just like, people hear that I speak well and so they might think that I know how to work a computer. Mm-hmm. But in fact, were my daughter not around sometimes so that I can call her and say, everything is not working. And she says, just hit this button. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't say, you idiot, because she's a nice person, but that's really implicit in her tone. The same thing here. They're just not transferable. You don't know anything about Israel or Palestine just because you can sing a song beautifully.
And in the intelligentsia and the journalistic space where people
when you get to the disappointments about people, it just tells you something about them, and then you have to judge how you feel about this person in a new way. And it's painful and it's difficult. But that's just, I almost want to say that's just part of the experience of adulthood, is that people aren't always who you think they are.
And also just there is a certain line. I always love just conceptually and in principle the idea that I have friends who have political disagreements with me, and we disagree on things, and it makes for a robust, interesting relationship with people. But at a certain point, there are ideas that are incompatible with friendship, mainly post-October 7th, posting solidarity with butchers and barbarians. You're just like, well, now we got a problem. We've reached that point. And that's where it's very,
Someone
you know better. I think you know better. I know you. You're not like some abstract celebrity, or somebody who I know is informed. Where's this coming from? Someone said to you.
Look, somebody who says Israel has to stop this, they're killing all these innocent people. I totally understand why they say that. I understand it. Somebody who says what Hamas did is fine. That's no different than saying any massacre is fine. So I don't think, I would be willing to engage someone preliminarily who would say that just to understand how they could say it. And maybe I'm not hearing what they're really saying, but if that's what they really believe, I've been to Kibbutz Be'eri, I've been to Ofakim. You can't. It's like going to Auschwitz and saying this is really okay. It's that it was a bit much, but it was okay.
What's the context of Auschwitz?
Yeah, right. If you speak that way, then you've put yourself outside the human circle that I inhabit.
Right. So that brings us to, I think, this one of the reasons we're talking is because you do have an event coming up with Gabor Mate, if I'm pronouncing his name right.
Yes.
I wanted to ask, just coming into that debate, one of the things that was really crystallized for me post-October 7th was that there is a difference between our opponents and our enemies. And we use a lot of the same language to describe both. Like Republicans talk about Democrats like they're monsters, and Democrats talk about Republicans like they're evil. Trump's a monster. We hate Biden's the worst. But at the end of the day, that's all kind of tribal sports talk that we use hyperbole to describe our opponents. and then you actually see monsters and you see evil in its purest manifestation. Right. And for some people, it's hard to look at. And for someone like me, it was hard, but I had to consume what I could to really look at this in the face. And it made me like relieved to say, okay, the people I think are my enemies are not my enemies. The people who I disagree with politically are not my enemies. I have real enemies. We all, as a human species, as a collective humanity, have real enemies. But where do you draw the line between someone who's engageable and coming into this, you are going to be I don't know if it's in the form of a debate or just a discussion, but you're going to be sitting down with Gabor Mate, who's been very outspoken. I would describe him as an anti-Zionist. I think he would accept that term. Right. And you're going to be sitting down with him and talking, and I know there's maybe to the extent that there's controversy about it, but I'm just curious how you evaluate
so
that.
I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah.
So someone approached me and said, would you talk to him? And the truth was, I didn't know anything about him when they said that. Mm-hmm. I did a little preliminary research, and here's what I learned for those of you who don't know who he is. Mm. Here's a guy who's a Holocaust survivor and a trauma expert who says things about Israel that I think are terrible. And so normally I would say, what's the point of engaging him? But then I discovered he has millions of followers. Millions. And I know, and this is the same reasoning of Israel going before the court, I know that for those people, they are never going to hear the case for Israel presented unless somebody talks to him and presents the case. So it's not a question of my platforming him. He has millions of followers. The question is, can I reach some of the people who are open to hearing the truth about Israel? And I hope I can. Now, the worst that happens is I don't. But it's not like I'm giving him credibility, because if he had 100 followers or 100,000 followers, I don't know that I would think that it was important. Mm-hmm. But given that he especially speaks to a community, many of whom are Jews, by the way, about trauma and the effects of it, and that he himself is a Holocaust survivor, which gives him to many of them credibility that he would not otherwise have, I just thought this was an opportunity that I shouldn't let pass.
And do you think it would be, as far as the conversation itself, is there anything constructive, besides you being able to make the case to appeal to his audience, between you and him? I don't know. I guess I have to wait and see. Right?
I don't know. I don't know. I've never spoken to the man. Mm-hmm. I have no idea whether it is possible to find any meeting of the minds or not. But if not, okay.
Mm-hmm. And do you craft your side of the conversation to appeal to someone who is interested in his message, or do you spend?
Interesting question. I have not given it a lot of thought. I think you always speak differently to different audiences, and I probably will speak a little bit differently to his audience than I would if I was going to, an APAC meeting. But I don't know exactly. What that will mean, because there's also a moderator, and I don't know what questions he'll ask. So we'll see.
He also went after Jordan Peterson a bunch, so I was like, forget this guy. I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, do a lot of impressions. He goes, Jordan Peterson is an agent of rage, in my opinion. You have to be careful, because he's going to talk like this the whole time. He's going to be very hypnotic. That's how Gabor Mate speaks, Rabbi. You have to be very, very careful. It's me making the jokes, don't worry. Jordan Peterson is an agent of rage, in my opinion.
I liked everything else he had to say about the world.
Oh, Gabor?
Until Israel.
That's interesting. So that's important. He's great. But that's important to know. So, so we'll see.
Do you try to strategically, based on what Michael's saying and going into it, like steel manning the argument, the anti-Zionist argument, to try to understand it, playing this devil's advocate? What do you think is I don't know. Maybe what's the most compelling or difficult question posed to you from the other side when you come up against these conversations?
Well, it's not so much a question as it is a narrative. I mean, this is where, by the way, I always recommend Yossi Klein Halevi's book, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, because he talks about it that really what's going on in Israel is a clash of competing narratives. Mm-hmm. And the narrative of the Palestinians is, we were sitting in our land, we weren't bothering anyone, we were just going about our business, and all of a sudden the British and the Jews came along and they said, now your land is our land, and they either drove us out or massacred us, And now they're saying, oh, we'll give you a little bit of it back if you're nice. And that's the Palestinian narrative. And so I think that's the hard thing to counter is, yes, we have our narrative, but you can't invalidate someone else's story by just telling them your own. And so so I think that you have to, and in this, I would say, yeah, you craft your message to the audience in some sense. You have to grant the validity of someone feeling that way and then talk about, how we see it differently without saying everything you say is just wrong. Right. Because from the Palestinian point of view, that is what they believe happened. And so in that sense, yeah, I hope that we will be able to have a conversation and not just talk past each other, but we might.
And I do. Do you find that in the way that a generation of us were kind of, we have our narrative as well, and then there's just the historical reality as such. And there's a lot of, and coming from the Orthodox Jewish community that we come from, it applies to other areas too, not just talking about Israel, but there is this sort of fear to cede any territory, no pun intended. There's this fear to give any sort of credibility or understanding that mistakes were made and suffering has happened. There's this fear of that because if you're admitting that, and then all of a sudden the deck of cards crumbles. And I feel like being able to understand the perfect is the enemy of the good, and the degree to which we're looking at things. Everything is a matter of degree. Israel's not a perfect country. Sam Harris has when he talks about Israel has said that very clearly. Certainly, there's been atrocities committed. Well, I don't like the whole just moral equivocation, but it's okay to cede certain instances and understand that there's matters of degree. Do you find that more people coming up learning about it?
I think that it's. I think that to talk about Israel to talk about it in a morally serious way, without acknowledging that Israel has done terrible things, is. It's like talking about America without saying America has done terrible things. Of course it has. And it's almost impossible without excusing it. It's almost impossible in this world to have enemies and to have power and to always hew perfectly to a moral line. I don't know that that's within human capacity. Just the fact, honestly, look, we're only talking among ourselves, right? There's nobody outside of this room. We're in your house. That you have 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old men who hold the power of life and death over populations. We all know what 18-year-old men are like. We were 18-year-old men, That's already a combustible, there's no way around it, but that is a very combustible and difficult situation. So when someone says that Palestinians are humiliated at checkpoints, I think, could an 18-year-old want to humiliate someone? Yeah, especially if they're scared and if they're, and not all 18-year-olds are morally serious people. Some are, but there's a wide variety of maturity in young people. So I think that you have to, the problem with conceding whatever to the other side is not so much that you'll concede it to the other side. It's that your own side will attack you. It's like if somebody who's pro-Trump says something bad about Trump, all the Trump people will yell at them. If somebody who likes Biden says something good about Trump, all the Biden people
total
will
fraud.
Yeah, right. That's the problem. Is you're afraid of your own side even more than the other side.
Right.
So that's why nobody who supports Gabor Mate said, "Oh my God, it's terrible that Rabbi Wolpe is going to speak to him." Only the people that are basically whose worldview is similar to mine said it's terrible. And so you have to have the courage, I think, sometimes to ignore your own side. And to, it's like Harry Truman said, sometimes you have to put your principles aside and do what's right. So.
Yeah, and then advocate on behalf of that side that's given you a hard time, and you can understand the fear. Yeah. It's a fragile.
Oh yes, absolutely.
It's fragile,
especially if you're part of a group.
Yeah.
That has what to fear. And anybody who looks at the world now and thinks that Jews have nothing to fear is an idiot. Yeah. You're willfully blind because obviously.
It's almost like this collective. There's a maternal instinct that the community has. Don't go out there and talk to that. No. Right. We don't want you getting hurt. And we don't want us getting hurt. Don't talk to him. He's not nice. Yeah. Well, I wish you the best of luck, Hatzlacha, in this conversation.
Where can people find the conversation?
I know it's going to be on YouTube. I don't know. I don't know what the exact link is.
No, there's a public event coming up, so it's going to be a public event first, and then they might stream it or figure out how to do it after the fact. Yeah. But I want to respect your time.
I just want to say this, though.
Yes.
I won't say anything that I don't believe. And that's really, as long as you know, as long as you're confident in yourself, that you're not going to be pulled out of yourself, then you're okay. And that's really, and about that, I am quite sure.
Well, I think being honest in these, I think that's the best weapon against all of it coming in, because people can take that away.
Right. So thank you.
Yes.
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about that. And I have to say you have a lovely home.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, I know the commute very well back and forth from New York to Boston. I was a student at Berklee College of Music. I didn't mention that at the top, but I spent 4 years there hopping around, did some Harvard Chabad eating and hanging out. So we wish you luck in this conversation and keep doing what you're doing, and always appreciate you being a force for wisdom out there in the world, representing our people and our ideas. Thank you, Rabbi Wolpe.
Thanks.